Okay. So good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is for you. This is late, and it is not the news we are waking up to. Last night, right before the live, I found out about insiders reporting. They did an 18-month investigation into the Russians paying the Taliban bounties on U.S. soldiers. Now, you may remember this story because this story originally broke. The New York Times broke it in 2020 when Trump was president, and we'll come back to that. So we've known that something like this was going on for a long time, but we've gotten extraordinary new details from it. And I'm going to cover this in some depth tonight on the live. But for you guys right now here in the Patreon, let's take a look at GRU Unit 2929155, which, if you are a follower of this channel, you've heard about before. You know about 29155. But if it's new to you, hang tight there, because this is a revelation. So here we are. It's Afghanistan. It's 2014. The U.S. is having trouble there, right? The Taliban continues to do its thing, and we are kind of stuck there. Russia hatches a plan to cause trouble, because that's what they do. They have all this money. They have all the money in the world from their oil and gas and uranium, etc. And rather than repair the steam pipes in Moscow, they say to the Taliban, hey, we'll pay you $200,000 for every U.S. service member or coalition forces member that you kill for us. Well, that certainly incentivized the Taliban, didn't it? I mean, how much of the failure of the Americans and the coalition forces in Afghanistan can be attributed to this funding of the Taliban? And that is not all, right? The Russians were selling the Taliban weapons during this period. So they had a relationship. Now, for the bounty program, it appears that they approached intermediaries, Afghan and Iranian intermediaries, to act as go-betweens between Moscow and the Taliban. The people behind it, the GRU. Now, this is like Russia's CIA, if you will. It's not exactly the same, because in a police state, there's no real division of power, right? Some jerk from the GRU wants to assassinate somebody inside of Russia, they're going to do it. It's not like the CIA and FBI, internal and external. It's not the same. But for the purposes of comparison, that's who the GRU are. They're responsible for covert activities, sabotage, cyber attacks, that kind of thing. Now, of course, it's Russia, so they're responsible for a lot more, right? They blew up the ammo depots in Czechia back in 2014. That handsome fella there in the middle, he was responsible for the Novichok poisonings in Salisbury Plain in England. These guys were responsible for the failed coup attempt in Montenegro back in 2016, just before they joined NATO, which put them out of these guys' reach for the most part. These three handsome fellas down at the bottom here, they were responsible for the failed assassination attempts in Bulgaria in 2016. And up there, that woman with the thing through her head, these are the guys that are accused of developing Havana syndrome. Now, or rather, the weapon that causes Havana syndrome. Now, if you haven't heard of Havana syndrome, it is a neurological condition in which people feel a sudden attack, pain in their heads, hot burning nails, like sharp shooting nails in the head. And then forever after, their memory is damaged, their ability to focus is damaged, they have chronic headaches, weakness, muscle pain, etc. Now, one could say that it's a physiological condition. The problem is it's a physiological condition that only happens to American and Western spies. I shouldn't say spies, I should say diplomats, right? Members of the diplomatic corps, who have done good work against the Russians. It's funny how everybody that gets it falls into that category. And if it were only a physiological condition that just came on people, what you wouldn't have is you wouldn't have it come on a family of 3, including their child, all at once at a cafe in downtown Tbilisi as they're trying to run out of the country as the Russians come in 2008, which happened to one family of American CIA employees in Tbilisi at the time. It is thought that the effects are caused by a high energy or sonic weapon of some type. So high frequency bursts that are damaging to human tissue is what we think is behind it. These are the people who hatched the plot to pay the Taliban bounty for U.S. servicemen. And then they took that money right back, selling weapons to the Taliban, so that the insurgency in Afghanistan and the destabilization of Afghanistan could continue despite the trillions of dollars that we poured into the country and our presence there. They undid all the good work we did with violence. Just that simple. Moscow and the Taliban move ever closer together. Right now, in the State Duma, they are trying to pass legislation that would delist the Taliban as a terrorist organization. It's insanity. I mean, what it is it's criminals getting together with other criminals in order to try to control the world. This is insanity, and it's insanity to let it go. Now, over the course of the 5 or 6 years that this program went on, it is thought, according to the reporting Insider, it is thought that the Taliban was paid $30 million in bounties. That's minimally 150 U.S. service members or coalition force members. At least 150. Thank you, Mr. Lavrov. Now, 6 former CIA officers who have analyzed the intelligence on the GRU's Afghan operations told the Insider that the findings complement and amplify what has been conventional wisdom of the U.S. intelligence community over the past 4 years, a conventional wisdom that has often been undermined and occluded by politicized agendas. We'll come back to that in one moment. There are many instances when we got punched in the face and were told to do nothing about it for fear of escalation. Fear of the Russians. That's what's holding us back. Just plain and stupid fear. And it's what got to Joe Biden and his coterie in the last days of this war, that they left $3.8 billion in weapons on the table. Just left it there. Unreal. Now, who's been doing the politicizing of the agenda? You know who. Here's a quote. When asked about this campaign back in 2020 to pay the Taliban for bodies of Americans, Donald Trump said, well, we supplied weapons to the Taliban too, making these false equivalencies where we are the same as our enemies. He knew. He fucking knew. And he did nothing about it. Because to him, those men in uniform in Afghanistan are not our best and brightest. They are not the the thin green line between civilization and anarchy. They are not the best and brightest and bravest of us who stand in the danger zone to protect us while we sleep. No, they are dispensable. They are staff. They're nothing and nobody. This guy doesn't understand anything at all about how the world works, unless it involves a cudgel. It is so disturbing to me that this person, who is supposed to be the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, is going back into the White House. We must gird our loins, and we must prepare ourselves to resist whatever insane, autocratic nonsense this racist, rapist, misogynist fuck thinks he can dictate to us from the Oval Office. And that is especially true for everybody in uniform. You made an oath to the Constitution, to uphold the Constitution, not to a man, and you are under no obligation to take an illegal order or to execute an unlawful command. I would remind, there's no need for me to remind the men and women in uniform of that. They know it. They know it. All right. So this is where we're at. The guy who doesn't give a fuck if our enemies are paying our enemies to murder us is back in charge. And I don't know how, none of us know what's going to happen as this Hurricane Trump approaches the world scene. I'm going to do, we've talked before about 29155 on the channel, and I think it's time we talked about them again. So in tonight's live, I'm going to do a deep dive into the activities of 29155, and we'll try to expose for folks just how bad Russian interference. If the Russians had spent half the money that they spent on trying to murder, assassinate, poison, undermine the democratic institutions of the rest of the world, if they had spent half that money on their own infrastructure and people, they would be a goddamn superpower today again. But they didn't. They stole everything they could. They did everything they could to create unrest and chaos in the rest of the world. They are the greatest threat to world peace that we have ever known, because they operate globally and they think there are no borders for them. They're trying to create a world with no borders, where just Russia can go and take what it wants. Well, that is not how we're going to survive this climate crisis. That is not how we as a species are going to get through this. These people have to be stopped, and everything that they stand for must be rejected out of hand. All right, I'll see you on the live tonight.